Thank you all so much for joining us for episode 15, season 4 of our Revise and Resubmit podcast. I'm Dr. Kim Bissell, the Southern Progress Endowed Professor in Magazine Journalism and the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Communication and Information Sciences at the University of Alabama.
And I'm Dr. Annalisa Boland, an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies, also at the University of Alabama. And we both work in the Institute for Communication and Information Research, or the ICIR, at UA. So, Kim, I have to confess, when I hear the term crisis communication, I get a little panicky, a little anxiety, and I automatically think about like a terrible, horrible, no good day type of crisis. And some of our guests, including today's, have such responsibility to manage and handle and resolve those really important crises that can occur on like an individual level, a political level, or even a city level. And I think I'm like, okay, how does one even go about figuring out how to manage those? And it turns out we have a class for that.
Well, turns out we have multiple classes. As today's guest discusses, communication theory is quite applicable to many areas of work. This is actually a common thread we've seen throughout the podcast. Today, we're talking to Dr. Richard Rush, the Executive Director of Strategic Communication for the City of Tuscaloosa. And what does an Executive Director of Communication do? Well, in his words, he puts out a lot of fires. And so we're going to hear about some of those in today's episode.
That's right. And interestingly, and something that I'll try to keep in the back of my mind, Dr. Rush mentions that sometimes the challenges that might come with crisis can be reframed as opportunities. And really, like when it comes down to it, these moments of challenge can be opportunity to make a difference to an individual, to ourselves, or even as Richard does, make a difference to a whole community or city.
That's right. So stick with us today as we learn more about how one of CNIS's own doctoral alum went first to academia and now works for the City of Tuscaloosa. This is a really great conversation, and we want to extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Richard Rush to our Revise and Resubmit podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Richard. We are thrilled to be able to catch up with you.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I have been looking forward to this.
Excellent. So, Richard, before we dive into some of the real questions here, I do have to ask you one question that might be of pretty big interest to our listeners. You are not only the first of your family members to have gone to UA, but there's more than one of you who has gotten a Ph.D. from our department. Can you tell us what's going on with this Rush family?
No, that is absolutely right. So we there are 6 kids in my family, and we had three of us got PhDs from the University of Alabama in communication, and another 2 got advanced degrees and are teaching other places. So we've just got a family full of academics right now. And I was in the academic world for a while, I guess almost 8 years, and then stepped into the role that I'm in now. So, but yeah, so I'm not sure, but apparently we love it over there.
Well, so, I mean, roll Tide.
That's it.
Thanksgiving dinners at the Rush household must be fascinating.
You know, it is. There is a lot of talk, a lot of what are you working on? What research is happening? Hey, I really think I would like to be on that paper. You know, that happens more than you could imagine at family dinners when we get together.
That's hilarious.
I like it. Okay, Richard, so let's shift gears and learn a little bit more about you.
Sure.
And what you do. So I'm going to ask a couple quick rapid fire questions. So first, can you tell us where you're from?
Yes, so I am actually from Tuscaloosa. Have moved off a few times for jobs, and then have just kind of always gravitated back to Tuscaloosa.
All right. And when were you at the University of Alabama doing your PhD?
PhD. So I finished my PhD in 2014. I guess, yeah. So the end of 2014, and then started teaching at Belmont University in Nashville in 2015. Yeah.
Nice. And so you're in Tuscaloosa now, but what do you do?
So now I am the executive director of strategic communication for the city. So that pretty much just means that I put out fires all day. So that's kind of that's what I do now.
That may be part of this episode's title, just so you know.
Mm.
No, I get it. Yeah. So I have been in this role for actually 4 days ago was my 3-year anniversary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I can't believe it's been that long. I feel like time just, I don't know if time stopped or if time sped up during COVID or what happened, but the past, you know, 2.5 years has just been a blur.
Yeah.
So what did the young Richard think he was going to be when he grew up?
You know, nothing like what I'm doing right now. So I actually always wanted to be an architect,
Oh.
and so I wanted to be an architect. And we have on my dad's side of the family a lot of architects, a lot of the construction industry, and so I just naturally thought that I was going to get into that. And then when I came to the university for my undergraduate, I started working in the football department. And so I started as a student worker there and was working in the recruitment and did a lot of the communication and then just loved it. And so that was kind of my first foray into communication on a professional level.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask kind of, I'm going to pivot here a little bit.
Sure.
So can you tell us about some of the work that you did, either the research that you did either in the PhD program or after you moved to Belmont, and then maybe how that relates to what you do now or doesn't?
Yes, no, I mean, it 100% does relate. So, the majority of the research that I did during my PhD program was on crisis communication.
Mm.
And so, I mean, it fit perfectly. And I actually, so when I was in undergrad, worked in the football department, loved the athletic side of working at a university or college. And so I kind of always had in the back of my mind, maybe I'd like to be an athletic director one day. So when I went back to get a PhD, I did a lot of my research in sports crisis. And so I did my research in sports crisis. When I got a position at Belmont, I was teaching in the PR department and I was teaching all crisis communication classes. And so it fit perfectly. My research while I was at Belmont was on crisis communication, and it kind of took a turn from more sports related to individual related, where I was looking at crises and how it impacted individual professionals. So started looking at a lot of politicians, and then it really just, I mean, my career just kind of stepped itself into, now I work in politics and I handle the crisis. So my research, I mean, plays into what I do every day.
So is there I mean, this would put you out of business, but does a perfect world mean that there are crises? Or like, do you find yourself as you work on putting these fires out?
Sure.
Does that mean like there are fewer fires to put out as people learn what they're maybe doing wrong?
No, I mean, and I think that is a very fair question. I think that there's always going to be issues that need to be handled. And so, and it doesn't always have to be some horrible crisis. I mean, I think a lot of times it's just kind of the way that you look at the situation where a challenge can actually be kind of an opportunity in disguise if you really play it right. So, I think that the hope is that you wake up, you come to work, and there's everything's smooth and there's nothing to deal with. But I mean, I think just with the 24-hour news cycle, with I mean, user error, or I mean, it could just be whatever. I mean, there's always going to be something that needs to be dealt with. So.
So I have a follow-up question as well, and I'm sure we should have told you. Our whole podcast is a series of follow-ups.
Sure.
So you're talking about crisis communication and putting out fires, but I think it would be good if our listeners could kind of better understand what you actually mean by crises. Because what may be a crisis to me may be very different from a crisis in like the professional world or in your world. So you don't have to like break it down into super specific stuff, but just kind of define that a little bit for our listeners.
Okay, so it could be anything from, I think one of the things that Kelsey dislikes about my job is whenever there's bad weather, I have to go to work, right? So it could be if there's a tornado heading towards Tuscaloosa, I have to go into work, because you never know if it does touch down, then we have a natural disaster or a crisis on our hands. It could be something like that. It could be we were sitting in incident command, I guess 3 or 4 weeks ago, the last time that we had a weather related crisis, and tornadoes is heading towards Tuscaloosa. We're looking at it on the radar. We got about 45 minutes, and then my phone starts blowing up, and it is reporters asking me, hey, we just got an email from the University of Alabama that there's been a fluoride spill on campus. And right, y'all remember that? Yeah. And the email sounded like there was chemicals flooding down University Boulevard.
Yep.
Right? Not at all what was happening. And so all of a sudden, I have to, ramp up from 0 to 90 to handle the communication surrounding a fluoride spill, so that everybody on campus doesn't think that, we need to shelter in place or whatever it is. And so it could be something like that. Or, I mean, those are just, I guess, two types of examples of some of the issues that I handle. And so.
Okay, so I have another follow-up and then another follow-up. Just
okay.
So the situation that you just described, because we're in Tuscaloosa and part of the UA community, we're getting the emails, we're getting the texts, we're getting the calls. And what it, I think, does to many of us is it raises our anxiety level, because it's like, oh, wow, Tuscaloosa could be coming our way. Oh, now there's a chemical spill.
Right.
But
next
you,
to Sharknado. Right.
But you, in the position that you have, you can't be. How are you able to navigate it and remain calm and not have increased levels of anxiety like everyone else getting the messaging?
I'm not saying that I don't have increased levels of anxiety, because I mean, sometimes when you're running 90 miles an hour, it just is, but I think that thankfully I've been able to use a lot of the research and that I've done previously, and you kind of come up with okay, if this happens, this is how I need to respond. If this happens, this is how I need to respond. And so it ends up being more almost of a mathematical equation when you're rolling out your communication around a crisis, rather than a spontaneous, I'm only in reaction mode. And so I think that is one thing that if you can turn it into I've got a plan that I'm walking through, step 1, step 2, step 3, it allows you to take a breath and kind of take a step back while the wheels are still moving. You're still putting out communication. You're still doing your job, but you can look at it more holistically, because you're not just frantically jumping from A to B to, trying to figure out what you need to say, because hopefully you've done a little bit of that work before it happened.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it. It's all about planning.
Yeah, it's all about planning. That is very, very true.
So going back to something you said earlier, the research that you did, that I'm familiar with. The
Yeah.
research that you did was related to athletes and
Right.
crisis communication, and now you have opportunities to be dealing with local politicians.
Right.
You may have to plead the fifth on this one, but are politicians and athletes similar in either the way a crisis might develop or in the way that they're handled?
I think that's a very good question. I think that it's probably becoming more and more similar. And I say that because you understand fanship, right? So
Mhm.
there is there's nothing like sports fans, right? They have this diehard, they will go to the wall for somebody that is their favorite athlete or whatever. Um, that's really not the case in most other areas, but I think the more and more that politics changes, you do have those diehard, you know, you either love the Democrat or you hate the Democrat, or you love the Republican, or you hate them. And so it is, I think, trending more towards a fanship style of crisis communication in
Mhm.
politics, when I don't think that that was the case maybe a decade ago, right? So I think it's becoming more and more similar. But still, there's nothing like a sports fan,
So true.
So, Richard, um, I wonder, you know, do you, when you're thinking about and discussing like how to put these fires out and just what those steps are you saying like, well, according to framing theory, this we want to use the uncertainty reduction model here.
That's funny. But, you know, so, I mean, if you're looking at like the situational crisis communication theory, right, at CCT, I mean, I gave a talk on at UA maybe 2 weeks ago, and I literally walked through using that theory how the tornado and fluoride example. And I was like, this is the communication I put out. You see how it fits in with this model and this level of responsibility, and walked it through. And so if you have the opportunity to plan ahead, a lot of times the theoretical side does play into the day-to-day handling of crisis. It's wild, but it does.
So you're saying theory is good.
I'm saying it is good. And you know what? I think when I was going through all the classes, I don't know that I would have said that. But now, man, absolutely.
Nice.
So let me take you back just not that long ago when you were a student here in the PhD program, and this is a follow-up to what you just said about theory. What classes were you drawn to, or what did you think might be the most exciting? And then what wound up ultimately maybe being the most surprising in terms of what you were interested in or what intrigued you? We're trying to put hoop out there for all PhD students.
Man, it is wild. I know it hasn't been that long, but it feels like it was a lifetime ago when I was back in school. I'm trying to...
And you're like, what classes did I take? No,
Yeah, right? No, I think that, even though I just said like some of my theory classes, like, oh, I don't know if that would have been that beneficial. I really enjoyed going through like a lot of those theories, because it does, it brings everything together for me. So it takes this idea out there that is random and breaks it down in a way where you go, oh, that's simple enough that, like, yes, I can believe that that's the way that would play out. And so I think that with just the way that my mind works, that the theory classes were probably some of my favorite ones. I mean, I was talking to one of my younger siblings when they were going through their PhD program or master's program, and it was their first semester, and they were working on a paper, and they had a whatever, like a 9 or a 10 or 11 page paper to turn in, and it was taking them days and days and days, and I was like, it's okay, like, you'll get to the point where, like, you can knock this out. Like, it's just you've never written these before, and you've never written in this style, but I'm not even sure where that thought came from. I was just thinking about writing papers and doing the research and classes. So,
but I think, like, to follow up on what you just said, I think it's really interesting because it's like, whether it's, you know, furthering education or what you do professionally, you get into something and you're like, oh my goodness, I have to write a 15-page paper and it seems overwhelming and daunting, or
all right.
I have to handle all the communication for the first time for like you in a position, professional position, with this, you know, tornado coming through. And then you get further into it and you're like, oh, 25 pages, literally I can do that in a day.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's a quick weekend. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're exactly right. And I think that, so the way that I just answered the question about, okay, handling anxiety and handling crisis or whatever, and how, if you have a plan, then you can take a deep breath. That is, I can say that now. I'm on my first day. Okay. So I started work. I don't even know if I'd finished all of my HR paperwork. Somebody came into to the HR office and said, "Hey, Richard, like, chief police needs you," you know. And so, oh man, here we go. And so, I mean, I wasn't even 30 minutes in, you know. And so I didn't even have, I definitely didn't have a plan to walk through at that point. But the longer that you're in it, the easier it gets. 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So I think probably most of our listeners are in academia.
Sure.
But we do have listeners who are in their undergraduate education. What would you say is the benefit to having a master's degree or a PhD? What did that, like, further education do for you related to your current position?
Okay. So I think that it would, so having more education is never a bad thing. I think one day I will probably get back into academics. I absolutely love it. One of my favorite things in the world is being able to help students start with A and figure out where you're going, help you get there, and then help you get a job and move on. Right? Like, I love that whole process. I think that for me, as far as like how has it played out? There's stuff that I've learned. I mean, every semester, either undergrad, masters, or throughout my PhD program, that I use all of the time. And I mean, whether it is theoretical models or whether it is just the ability, I think that a lot of it is being able to look back and go, hey, I made it through a PhD program. I don't know if I was smart enough or just hard-headed enough to get through it. But like, I think that that kind of stuff gives you confidence going forward. So, I mean, I think that there is a myriad of ways that going through a master's program or a PhD program help. I think when you're looking at now, as I'm hiring people, and I do see the masters, that means a lot to me because I know what it takes to get it. I mean, it's not easy, but I know the added benefit that you have because you went through the program, and you've generally got a little bit more experience and now a little bit more knowledge. And so, I mean, it absolutely makes a difference.
So what I'm curious about, and this was something that you had kind of alluded to earlier, in all sorts of situations, we're going to hit points where the minutia just kind of kicks in. And maybe we even find ourselves wondering, why in the world are we doing this? I feel like when you go through a PhD, you have that. But even in a professional career, whether it's what you're doing or in academia, we feel that way as well. So when it gets down to the minutia, what do you do? What can you share with our listeners about how you push through during those times?
I think that is when a lot of the kind of the basics kicks in, because you are right. There are some times when, whether it was one of the hardest times in my academic career was, I remember it was somewhere between that second and third year. And it just hits you as a PhD student, and you're like, why am I doing this? Like, what am I mean, you're in the grind of it. And it is, for me, I think sometimes you go, okay, it's a means to an end. I'm working hard. I'm not giving up. It's digging deep and finding that motivation. But I think it's now, not in a, student type setting, but in a professional setting or in an academic setting, there is a lot times when the minutia, you just get into the normal routine. This is what I do every day. This is and a lot of times what I do now is I'm able to use that time and go, okay, let's look at this. What do I need to be working on? What is some strategy that I have left behind? What is some planning that I have left behind that I can put in now so that I'm not in the day to day, and I'll try to mix it up where I'm actually adding benefit to myself in the future, but it's breaking up the monotonous, this is what I'm doing so if I can mix it up, and I don't know if that's just the ADD in me where I have to mix it up. But if I can mix it up with either strategy or planning for the future, that's how I try to do it.
So, Richard, when you consider your professional career so far, what are you most proud of?
And that is a good question. I am proud of, I think I love what I'm doing right now, but I absolutely loved the work that I did as a professor, and the difference that I was making in students' lives and colleagues' lives. Like, that is one of the things that drives me is being able to make a difference. Right. So I feel like in my day-to-day job right now, every day I am making some type of difference in the city of Tuscaloosa. So a city where I grew up, a city that I love. I feel like my fingers on the pulse, I'm making a difference. So that is something that I'm proud of now. I think, and when I look back at my academic career, I can think back to, specific students' names that, I met them as a freshman, helped them figure out what they want to do. I might have been their advisor or whatever. And then at the end of the day, I helped them get a job, like, I love that process of making a difference and helping. So I think that is, in my career, the positions that I've had, that's been a common theme through all of them.
That's great.
Yeah.
So Richard, we asked this of all of our guests, simply because when we started this podcast almost 2 years ago, we were right smack dab in the middle of lockdowns and nobody traveling. And while things have lifted, we're still a little bit there. So I have to ask, is there a place that you're looking forward to traveling in the future, or just a place on your bucket list that you want to share?
Oh, absolutely. So, Kelsey and I actually had a trip. So the city of Tuscaloosa has a sister city in Germany, and Kelsey and I were going to go on behalf of the city to that trip earlier this year, and it got canceled because of COVID. Again, I feel like everything opens up and closes down, it opens up and closes down. And so I just got an email actually last night late that said, hey, the trip's back on, going in November. So Kelsey and I are going to Germany and then southern France, hopefully in November. So I am super looking forward to that right now.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Richard, it's been so much fun catching up with you today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to catch up with us. It's been so much fun.
Thank you guys. This has been a blast.
Awesome.
Thanks, Richard.